On June 25th, 1968, the Robison family was killed in their summer cabin located in the Good Hart area off Lake Michigan. Among the family members were Richard Robison, 42, Shirley, 40, Richard, 19, Gary, 16, Randall, 12, and Susan, 7. They had been murdered by gunshot. They had several gunshot wounds on their bodies, and they ultimately were shot in the head. And Richard, the father, and Susan, the little girl, were also bludgeoned with a hammer. The family had discussed plans to take a vacation to Kentucky. So when they originally went missing, nobody in the area thought anything about it because they had just assumed that the family had gone on this vacation that they were talking about. It wasn't until 27 days later that the neighbors had started to smell something very, very terrible coming from the area of the cabins. One of the neighbors had called Chauncey Bliss, the groundskeeper for the cabins, and he brought with him an employee of his to find where the smell was coming from. It was later determined that the smell was coming from the cabin that the Robisons had stayed in, but once Chauncey Bliss had knocked on the door, there was no answer, so he looked through the window where he ultimately found the body of Shirley. This is when he immediately left and called the police. According to records, all of the family members were in the living room at the time of the shooting. Richard was in an easy chair. Randy was standing right next to him. Shirley was in an armchair. The oldest boys, Richard and Gary, were playing double solitaire at a table, and Susan was playing on the floor, all in the living room. The killer then shot through the front window, hitting Richard twice in the chest, and it's speculated that Gary may have been shot in the back as he was playing cards. The killer then entered the cabin and shot Shirley, Randy, and then Susan as she had ran for cover. The oldest boys then ran to the back bedroom, but the killer got to them before they could get their gun. The killer then hit Susan with the hammer and shot each of the family members in the head with a .25 caliber handgun. The killer locked all of the doors, closed the shades, and put cardboard over the holes on the window. They discovered that Shirley had been strategically positioned to make it look like she was sexually assaulted, and they also found that $700 in cash as well as several expensive pieces of jewelry had been missing, but there were several pieces of expensive equipment throughout the house, such as cameras and things of that nature, as well as the wallets of the individuals in the house had all been left behind. There were several pieces of evidence at the crime scene that could be used to ultimately find the killer of the Robison family. There was the hammer that was used to bludgeon Susan as well as the father. There were bloody footprints throughout the cabin. There was a note on the front door saying, "Be back soon." And there were shell casings of a gun. However, the most crucial piece of evidence found at the crime scene was the hammer, and ultimately the evidence was tampered because an undersheriff picked up the hammer with a paper towel and held it up in the air while a photographer took a picture of the hammer, but the paper towel ultimately wiped away any evidence that could have been on the hammer, such as DNA or fingerprints of the killer. Many people were suspected of being involved in the Robison murders. However, it wasn't until the investigators of the case actually took a closer look at Richard Robison's business and his business partner that red flags were raised. Almost immediately, investigators definitely thought that Joseph Scolaro was definitely involved in the murder of Richard and his family because he had been caught embezzling money from Richard's company. And the day that the family was killed, it was suspected that Richard had learned of the embezzlement. And when Joseph was made aware that Richard knew of the embezzlement, he decided to cancel all of his appointments for the day of the murders, and there are 12 hours that are unaccounted for. Some people speculate that Joseph did not have enough time to leave work that day and travel to the Good Hart area where the cabins were and ultimately commit this murder and then be back in the Detroit area. But as you can see on the map, there is definitely enough time. I mean, 4 hours to get there and then 4 hours back. That leaves 4 hours of unknown time. And another thing is, Joseph stated that he had canceled all of his meetings for work that day and appointments because he was going to some type of convention. But although people did state that he was there on a different date, and essentially he wasn't there on June 25th, the day of the murders. Among the other suspects were Chauncey Bliss, the groundskeeper, the Zodiac Killer, John List, and a co-ed killer, also known as John Collins, who was convicted in 1970. John List was another suspect in the Robison murders because he had committed almost similar crime to this one. He had killed his own family and strategically positioned them in the house, and they were not found for almost a month after the fact because he had canceled newspaper subscriptions, milk deliveries, anything that involved anyone coming to the house. He canceled it all. He told his neighbors that they were going to go on vacation. So when the family once again was not missing, nobody knew that they were actually missing. They assumed that they had already gone on vacation until somebody noticed that the lights that were on inside the house had never changed. And this concerned them a little bit, so they went to the house with police and they found the bodies of the family, the three children, the wife, and the mother of John List, dead in the house after 30 days, as well as a letter basically apologizing for the crime. He had stated that he was deeply, deeply sorry for having to kill his family, but he would rather kill his entire family than have them suffer and basically go through financial difficulties because he had just lost his job and he could not financially support them anymore. And he felt that killing his family was better than allowing them to live on government assistance. John List could be a suspect for these murders. However, in my personal opinion, although I do realize some similarities, I definitely do not think that John List was responsible for this crime. Yes, he killed his family. However, he did so with an intent. He did it with a sole purpose. He did it because he thought that it would be best for his children to die than to go on and have to live on government assistance. There was a deep connection to his crimes. I don't feel as though that's a serial killer because, like I said, he had a specific motive for that crime. Now, he did go on, he went 2 decades without being caught. And once he was caught, the police realized he had a wife, he had children, he had a blooming career. So he basically just started his life over. I don't feel like he was just out there killing random people. As for the Zodiac Killer, I definitely think that that is very far-fetched. I mean, there really isn't any evidence proving that this crime was specifically linked to the Zodiac killer. I mean, there was no Zodiac sign anywhere, there were no messages, there were no cryptograms, there were no cards. There was nothing that linked this crime to the Zodiac killer, for which he was so notorious. He did not confess to this crime at all. This crime was never mentioned in any of his cryptograms. I mean, it might have been because there are cryptograms that aren't solved now, and the Zodiac case is very, very, very detailed, and it could be a possibility. However, I don't think that's very likely at all. I definitely feel like these murders were personal. I mean, Susan, the little girl, and the father were both bludgeoned with a hammer. So that to me, that, one-on-one contact with the suspect and the victim, it definitely screams that these people knew each other and this was a crime of passion. And this person he was emotionally connected to the crimes that he was committing. John Collins was also a suspect in this case due to the fact that John and Richard, the oldest son, went to Eastern Michigan University together. However, I don't feel like there's a huge connection there. I mean, it was speculated that they did know each other, but the police immediately ruled him out as a suspect. Although the police had tons of theories and tons of tips, the evidence ultimately led back to one person, Joseph Scolaro. They believe that the motive of Joseph Scolaro basically stemmed from this embezzlement and the fact that he was caught by Richard and he didn't want Richard to tell on him or to get into further trouble. However, it only took a forensic accountant to analyze the financial data for the company to determine that Joseph indeed was embezzling. He had embezzled up to $60,000 from the business of Richard Robison. Joseph was also a sharpshooter in the military a few years prior to being a business partner of Richard's, which can easily explain the fact that he was able to stand on the opposite side of the street and shoot across the street into the window and ultimately kill Richard. He had taken 3 polygraph tests, 2 of which he failed and 1 of which was inconclusive because the interviewers deemed him deceptive. Chauncey Bliss was also a suspect in this crime. Me personally, I definitely don't think that he was involved at all. But the theory goes that he had lost a son previously to these murders, and because he was so emotionally unstable, he basically killed the Robison family out of revenge. I haven't been able to find, maybe the Robison family was connected to the son's accident and maybe caused his death. There's absolutely no connection. So I definitely don't see this being a possibility. I definitely think that Joseph Scolaro was 100% the killer in this case. I feel like he acted solely alone and he committed this crime because he was caught in the act of embezzling and he didn't want anybody to find out about the embezzling, so he decided that he was going to take it upon himself and kill Richard and his family because there was a possibility that everyone knew. However, once the investigation came to head and they started looking into the company and Joseph as a business partner, they almost immediately found that Joseph had been embezzling money from multiple of Richard's companies. So, doesn't really counter anything that he was trying to do. I mean, he still got caught ultimately. So, why you had to kill a family of 6 is a little bizarre to me, but some things are just unexplainable. He had failed 2 lie detector tests, and one was inconclusive. Based on his deceptiveness, he was basically trying to fool the lie detector investigators, trying to throw off their investigation. So inevitably, it didn't work. He still passed 2 lie detector tests, and honestly, that's enough for me. So that's a huge red flag right there. I mean, he was a sharpshooter in the military, so he definitely had good aim. He could have definitely stood across the street and shot through a window and, ultimately killed somebody. So I can definitely see that he is very, very strongly a person of interest, and I can definitely see why he is a person of interest. Not to mention that he knew this family, he was close with this family. I mean, he was Richard's business partner. So for somebody to commit such a heinous crime as bludgeoning somebody with a hammer, I mean, that's kind of emotional. Like, that screams emotional attack. That definitely symbolizes that there was a close relationship, and this was something similar as a vendetta or maybe some revenge, but it was definitely personal. Um, thing that I want to touch on briefly is that he did frequent a gun range where shell casings were found that matched the 25 caliber shell casings from the original crime scene. However, once the case started to die down, it wasn't until a couple of years later that a new prosecutor had came and decided to reinvestigate the crime. Once Joseph Scolaro realized that he was back under the spotlight, he was back under investigation, he decided to commit suicide, and he actually committed suicide with the 25 caliber weapon that was used to kill this family. It may not have been the same exact weapon, but it was the same make and brand. And he did leave behind a suicide note where he basically stated, I am a liar, I am a cheater, I'm a thief, but I am not a murderer. I did not commit these crimes. So that concludes my video for this week, the Good Hart Murders. I would definitely want to know what you think. Do you think that Joseph Scolaro had a hand in these murders? Do you feel like it was somebody else, maybe somebody that I didn't mention in the video? Another question I really want to know your opinion on is, do you think that lie detector tests are reliable? Do you think that they should hold up in court and be on the basis of conviction? I would love to hear your opinion and what you have to say about these questions and about this case. If you have any future cases you would like me to discuss in my future videos, I would love to hear about them, whether it's a part of a new series or a part of a series that I've already started on my channel. Be sure to leave a comment in the comment section, and I will see you guys next time.